When I became a preacher, I was warned that there would be days that I would feel like an imposter. Anytime, actually, we're learning new things, we're going to feel that way. And we're called on because of our faith, not because of preaching, but because of faith, to be there for people who need us. And this is not something that comes naturally for a lot of people. It's very difficult to do. And mourning is a process that is very difficult, but it is something that we can make a major impact. I read a text message this morning from a preacher friend. He said, the best evangelist is not the preacher in a community, it's the church. And there's so much truth to that. I can do my part. I can do what I can. But there's no possible way I can have the impact of all of the members of the congregation who are out interacting with other people and helping them through times of difficulty and helping show them what love is about. Another, related to that is this idea that if we're going to be the hands and feet of Jesus in the community, if we're going to show anything about ourselves to the community, it should be that we love them. If they know us for anything, it should be our love. And a lot of times we get caught up in teaching the truth, which we must do. I'm not saying we shouldn't. But we get so caught up sometimes in making sure we're correcting error that we forget that Jesus didn't say they would know us because of our truth. He said they would know us because of our love, that we know that He is from God, that we are His children because of the love that we have for one another and the love that we have for others. And this love and this faith puts us in awkward situations that you don't really know how to deal with until you're there. And until you get over that fear, then it'll keep you away from a lot of situations. So these types of lessons are simply to encourage you to step into situations that are probably right before your face and not be afraid to make mistakes and blunder through them. Man, I tell you, I can tell you so many stories of bad things that I did early on preaching and dealing with people who are stricken with grief. There's a whole list of them. And I lived through it. And the people that I did all these bad things to, that I didn't sin against them, but I just did stupid things. They were okay. It didn't hurt them for the rest of their lives. They got over it and moved forward. So I want to encourage you to think about this. This is 6 tips. This is very, very simple ideas that you probably already know. They're common sense, but it's a reminder and encouragement for you to look into the lives of other people who may be suffering and hurting. And or if you are suffering and hurting right now, maybe it'll help you recognize and realize that people want to help, but they often don't know what to do to help. And that's going to be the case even after this lesson. You're going to be in situations you're not going to know what to do or what to say, and that's okay. And walking with the grieving, there are a lot of passages that we can look at in the Bible to help us through and give us some insight into that. The first one is to be patient with people. This is obvious, but in Job chapter 2, verses 11 through 13, we have the story or the account of the friends that came to see Job. And we can say a lot of bad things about these friends, but we can say some good things too, especially at the very beginning of what was going on. It says in chapter 2 and verse 11, when Job's 3 friends heard of all this adversity that had come upon him, each one came from his own place, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite, for they had made an appointment together to come and mourn with him and to comfort him. And when they raised their eyes from afar and did not recognize him, they lifted their voices and wept. Each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head toward heaven. So they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great. They didn't know what to say either. But we need to remember that grief is simply a reconciling that your brain does. And I don't mean to dismiss it or make it sound so simplified, but essentially that's what it is. Our brain is trying to make sense of reality now. We miss the person. It could be actually, grief can be many things. It's a loss of some kind. Any kind of loss can trigger a grieving response. And it's usually people that we grieve the most. And the closer they are to us, of course, the more we're going to grieve. This is part of life. This is how our brains work, and it's how we learn to accept a new reality. And it's difficult. It hurts. It's very stressful, in fact. Not only is the pain itself a stress, not only the loss is a stressor, but all the activities and things that used to be done between the two are now gone, and now there's readjustments that have to take place. This is especially true when you have a husband and a wife relationship. So when a husband loses a wife or a wife loses a husband, there are millions of things that they have between us that the other one would do to take care of the spouse, and the one that is left behind is looking at all the things that were done to take care of him or her at the point, and now she or he doesn't know what's going to happen because who's going to do these things? They're having to take on the additional responsibility of taking on these things for themselves, all kinds of things. This is stressful. Not to mention all the stupid things that have to be done. And I say stupid things because there are so many regulations and red tape and things that are just ridiculous that we have to do when a loved one dies. It's difficult and it's hard and it's extremely stressful. So you're going to run into people who will have all kinds of outbursts. They're going to say things perhaps that you would never dream of them saying in other situations. They're going to be crying and sometimes even very loudly crying and exclaiming. And we know that a lot of times if they're Christians, this is going to help alleviate those kinds of things. But you're going to run into people who are it's going to seem like they have lost everything, that there's nothing that they can hold on to anymore. And it's a really difficult thing to watch. To watch someone break down and fall apart, and you're starting to wonder, is this person going to make it? They will say things like they want to kill themselves. And you have to learn to avoid judgments. And remember that people say things that they don't mean sometimes. Now, I would suggest if somebody's talking about suicide, don't take it lightly and don't dismiss it. But generally speaking, the things that they say should be simply disregarded. Don't judge them based upon a very stressful, difficult moment that they're going through. But if you look at what happened here with Job's friends, notice some things here in verses 11 through 13. It says, when his friends heard of all this adversity that had come upon them, each one came from his own place. You know, these were rich men. They had servants. They had the ability to send messages and notes. It wouldn't have been email or text messages, but it could have been. They didn't send things. They didn't send a servant to say, oh, we send our regards, I'm sorry. They came themselves because they were his friends. And they didn't want to leave him in this lurch and not do something to try to help. And they went and sat with him. And then if you also notice that it says at the end of that verse, they made an appointment together to come and mourn with him and to comfort him. So they discussed this ahead of time. Let's go and help this man. And they may have had a plan. They wanted to come and sit with him, but they came together. And that way that they can offer the best amount of service. But if you look in verse 12, also it says, when they raised their eyes from afar, they didn't recognize him. They lifted up their voices and wept. You know, it's okay if you're around someone who's mourning and if you get upset as well. There's nothing wrong with crying with someone. It's not something that will make them wonder about you. It's not something that will scare them. It's not something that will do anything negative. It will actually comfort them. It will help them to see that you care as well. And so if we happen to, I'm not saying that you should go there and, put on the crocodile tears and pretend to cry, but if it comes up, don't fight against it. Let it happen, because you may encourage them to do something they need to do, and it also shows that you care about them. One of the most powerful, impactful verses in the Bible, that's also the shortest verse in the Bible, is Jesus wept. It was important enough that John would write that one little phrase there. And I realize they didn't have verses back then when they still wrote it. But it was notable. It was something that was stated about Jesus that stood out, because here he is. He is the one who's about to raise Lazarus from the dead. And it says that Jesus, seeing the weeping of the people around him, Jesus wept. What an amazing thing that Jesus did. And we can be helpful as well. So they came together. They decided to make an appointment to come together. They probably wanted to make sure it was going to be okay with him. They came to comfort him. When they didn't recognize them, because he was already so torn up by the disease that was all over his body, they mourned. And then it says in verse 13, they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him. You know, your presence is important. Being there for someone. You don't have to say the right things. You don't have to say anything. Sometimes the silence will be enough to help encourage them to say something too. And that's what they need to do. They don't need to hear you talking. They need to talk. They need to get it off their chest. They need to discuss it. They need to bring up the memories and the difficulties and the challenges. And you being quiet and available to them will be a great help. I don't suggest that you go and spend 7 days and 7 nights with them. But if you're that close, maybe so. One of the things that I did when I first started preaching, early on in my preaching, was, it wasn't when I first started, but anyway. There was a couple, I was new in a congregation, there was a couple who was losing the wife's mother was dying at home. And I thought it would be any time. That's what they say. Be any moment now. It was a week, but it was any moment. And I took it literally. And I said, okay, I want to be there. And I went in and I said, I'll be here. And I stayed and stayed and stayed and stayed. After a while, they're like, hey, Jason, are you going to go home and eat? I'm going to stay here. I just knew it was going to be any moment. I wanted to be there for them. And I stayed and stayed and stayed. I overstayed my welcome big time. And they were very gracious and helpful, but they didn't know me. Here I was, some stranger in the back room, sitting there playing my games on my phone or something. I don't know what I was doing. I think I was reading my Bible, but we need to be cautious and careful. It's okay to stay a long time, but you've got to know them, right? You've got to have that kind of a relationship to begin with. And this is one of the reasons that, as a preacher, I can go and help offer comfort and aid in other people who are mourning. I can walk in and I realize sometimes that being a quote-unquote preacher can help people feel more comfortable. I don't know why that is, but it is. It's the case. And so I don't mind being able to and available, but there's only so much that I can do. But if you know that person, you can do much more and much better work than I can. And so this is what I said before, that the preacher is not as effective in the community as the church. And I'm part of the church as well, I realize that. But we're all working through this together, so we need to be patient. We also need to be prayerful. James chapter 5 and verse 13 tells us that if anyone is mourning, he should pray. And then we also have in chapter 5 and verse 13 that we should confess our trespasses to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. The effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. And so these things tell us that we should pray. If anyone is suffering, verse 13, let him pray. And we should encourage the people who are suffering to pray. The best thing that we can do is to pour our heart out to God. And often we distract ourselves if we're mourning, we distract ourselves from God. We distract ourselves with doing all kinds of busy work. We distract ourselves with television. We distract ourselves with this and that. And what we need to do is go out, turn off all the electronics, or go out for a walk and just open up yourself and pour yourself out to God. That's the best thing that someone who is in mourning can do, hands down. But it also is something that you can do to encourage them. Pray with them. Help them to form the words. They may not be able to form their own words. They may not want to bow their heads and go to God in prayer because it's painful, but they will be much better off if you pray for them and you pray with them. And don't forget the importance and the power of coming to the God of the universe with problems and challenges that we face. He understands and can help. The other one would be to Romans chapter 12, 15 through 16, is to be present. he says in verse 15, "Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble. Do not be wise in your own opinion." You see here, we're told in verse 16 that we need to be of the same mind toward each other, that we're open toward each other, and that we're unified. And he says, don't set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble. Sometimes those humble people we don't want to associate with because it's scary for us. We don't like to see people who are suffering and hurting because we don't feel like we can help. And that's a natural thing. You're not going to feel like you can help, and you probably can't help much. But you can be of an aid. You can be of an assistant. You can comfort them. And that's really all you should be looking to do. But he also says in verse 15 that we rejoice with those who rejoice. And that's the fun part. Isn't it wonderful when people come and they have good news and you light up and you're excited for them and there's excitement, it's mutual excitement? Of course there is. And if you want to have friends, that's the best way to do it. When they have good news, always be the one that says, "Great job," or "Way to go," and cheer them on, because everyone loves that kind of thing. But the next one is even more powerful, where he says to weep with those who weep. And that's not always easy to do. It hurts, it's difficult, it's scary. Sometimes we're even dealing with our own ideas of mortality. We haven't maybe made it through the process of thinking through our own mortality or the mortality of the people who are around us. It's very similar to people who are in the hospital for various things, or people going through difficult struggles that you can't relate with. It's scary because you don't know how to react, you don't know what you should say, and it's also scary because we think, "Oh, that could be me. What happens if that happens to me? How am I going to react?" All kinds of things that are going on. But one of the best things that you can do is to be present. Just be there for them. Cry with them. Laugh with them. Whatever they're going through, whatever emotions they're having, let them have them and be there for them. The next one is to be humble. It's okay not to know what to say. In fact, I would encourage you to just be honest and open with that. If you always know what to say, then you don't actually know what to say. You just think you do. It's okay to let other people comfort other people as well. It doesn't have to be you. You don't have to be the one that's going to offer comfort. Sometimes it's almost like Christians get in a competition. No, I'm going to be the one to comfort them. I'm going to be the one to make them feel better. And there's almost I wouldn't say a fight, but there's almost a little bit of a competition to see who is the one who can shower them the most. That's not humble. Humility says, maybe someone else can do a better job at this than I am. That doesn't mean that I can't do anything, but I'm going to let some other people who are closer take care of this person because they know them better. And then don't be afraid to ask what's needed. One of the things that we can do is often go in and assume that we understand. We assume that we know, and that's never a good idea. But we go to those people and say, "What can I do?" And you'd be surprised some of the things that they might ask you to do, and be humble enough to do those things, because we often have these lofty things that we think, "Oh, they're going to ask me to do some great thing for them, monumental task." And it might be that they need you to vacuum their bedroom. We need the humility to recognize that even the little things that need to be done still need to be done, and we can offer help to other people and going through the challenges and difficulties. I'm kind of getting into the next point, but look in Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. It says, "Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others." Look at what they need in their lives and offer to help. That is where humility comes in, and meekness. Then you embrace the situation that they are in and offer to help. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 2 says to bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. The law of Christ is that we love each other, that we love God first and we love each other as Jesus loved us. And so we show this by bearing one another's burdens. There's many contexts that could relate to. Specifically here, it seems to be talking about spiritual problems that people are having, but it relates to all kinds of things. As I said before, we offer to help people. Bearing their burdens might be just doing laundry for them. It might be going to run errands for them. Whatever it is. See, all these necessities and things that have to be done day in and day out, they don't stop. The need doesn't stop. It doesn't go away just because someone is mourning. But you think about situations and times where you've had difficulties. How much did you really want to get up and clean the house? How much did you really want to get up and do all kinds of things? In fact, it's so debilitating that most of us will not do anything for a long time. And we'll put those things off. All we need is someone to come in and say, I would love to do this. And incidentally, especially if you're close to them, you don't have to have their permission. If you're over at their house and you're talking and you see something needs to be done, talk to them while you're doing the dishes. Just get up and do them. Because while you're doing that, you're helping them out. They might even protest, say, no, don't do that. And say, you sit down, I'm going to do this. And there's nothing wrong with that. You're trying to help someone. Now, if they're offended by it, that's something you have to deal with, but you want to be respectful, but at the same time, offer to help and do those things that are needed and necessary. And that's a wonderful way to get into their lives and to show them that you care about them. Food is one of the things that we do a lot. And there's reason for it. We all need to eat. And incidentally, there's two reactions usually related to food, I've noticed, when people are in mourning. They've lost someone. One is they don't eat. They forget to eat. They're hurt too much. They feel like they're going to get sick if they eat. The other extreme is they eat way too much. They overeat. Those are typically how people react. And it's typically one of the two. But what we can do is bring them food, because especially if they don't want to eat, we bring them food and they get around it. We encourage them to eat something. They might do it. So we had the funeral last week. We had the reception for Brother Bowen, and we had the family there. The family said, well, they're going to be about 35 or 40. There was a lot more, but there will be 35 or 40, but I think that most of them are not going to want to eat. They're like, oh, yeah. But when they get around the food and they get around the other people eating, it'll trigger and they'll decide they're going to eat, and sometimes they'll eat even more. And some of them ate a lot, and they probably need it. May not have eaten much in the last couple of days. But this is one of the great things that we do. Don't ever think that that's unimportant. It's very important to help them, and it can be a great, great aid to them. And the last one I would say is to stay in touch. After the funeral, everything settles down. There's family all around. But after the funeral, they all go home. And I haven't experienced this, but from what I've been told, when you lose a spouse and that last family member leaves, they go home, and you shut that door, and you realize for the first time you're all by yourself. It's a very difficult time. It's a time that everyone has to go through, that you can't get out of that. It's something we've got to face. But one of the things that we can do is stay in touch after the funeral. And that might mean that we make a concerted effort to once a week go by and see them, or to give them a phone call. Let them know that you care. Let them talk. Ask them how things are going. And it's okay to ask those kinds of questions. After these things happen, when all the lights are off, all the dishes stop coming, the well-wishers stop coming, all the family goes home, it eventually stops. And there are people who are left alone, and they're wondering, where are all these friends that I had? Well, life continues on. And just because it continues on doesn't mean that you're not still suffering, but they can't understand that. They don't see what you're going through. So be patient with them, but also for us. We need to be aware. We need to make ourselves aware, to look at where they are and see what can I do. Even if it's for 3 weeks, you say, I'm going to call them once a week for 3 weeks. Make some kind of a commitment to go by them, especially if you know them well. And this is something that the church does, I think, amazingly well. And it's something that we can do even in the community to help people. You're building relationships. You're helping people. You're showing love, and you're being in touch with them. And it doesn't have to be physically. It doesn't have to be face-to-face. But stay in touch as much as you can. And these are things that I think that will help you in walking with the people who grieve. And like I said, these are very simple. But I just want to be an encouragement to you tonight to look at your own life and ask the questions, what can I do to help someone else? And don't be afraid of being in that life, in their lives, and making a difference, trying to make a difference. Don't be afraid of making mistakes, because you're going to make mistakes, and that's perfectly fine. They are not going to hate you for making a mistake. They're going to appreciate you for trying. Well, this evening, if you have any needs, maybe you're walking in grief and you need some help, you need prayers, we're here for you. We want to be supportive. Sometimes people who are going through grief and the grieving process pretend that everything's okay, so it convinces everyone around them that it's okay and they don't need anything, but deep down they still do. Well, if you're that way, I want to encourage you not to be that way. When someone asks you, how are you doing, be honest with them. Tell them if you're hurting, or if you're needing somebody to come and visit, say, I could use a visit. I could use a friend right now. And I can almost guarantee you that the person you're talking to will make an effort to come out and see you. If you're not a Christian, it's a great opportunity to become one today. And if you need help with that, if you need help, prayers of the church, anything that you need from us, let us know. And please come as we stand and sing.